Welcome to the EY NextWave Private Equity Podcast, where we explore what's happening now, next, and beyond in the world of PE. Digital, sector, talent, value creation, ESG. These topics are top of mind for executives across the global private equity ecosystem. Join us for the insights you need to reframe the future of private equity. Now, here's your host, Winna Brown from EY.
Today we are discussing how customer experiences are driving digital transformation in private equity, and I'm joined by two brilliant gentlemen. Sean Epstein, Senior Vice President and Global Head of SAP Private Equity and Mergers and Acquisition Programs. Sean's team builds strategic partnerships with mid-market and global private equity firms to support them across their investment lifecycle. Also with us is EY's Marc Noë, a Manager Director in EY's digital practice. Marc works with clients across multiple industries to assess digital opportunities and/or potential threats, and he then creates operational execution plans to drive customer value and improve financial results. I'm very excited for today's conversation to have you both here, albeit virtually, of course. Marc, Sean, welcome to the podcast. Gentlemen, it feels like everyone in private equity's value creation circles is focused on digitalization. Digitalization can mean different things, often depending on the stage of the company's life cycle. Marc, perhaps you can kick us off by defining how we're seeing digitalization today, and maybe also give us a few examples to help picture that.
Digital is really about driving enhanced experiences for your customers. However you define a customer, whether it's an end customer, whether it's a business customer, employee, business partner, investor, or even in some cases, influencers, if you think about consumer products, for example. Now, that will require new ways of working as well as leveraging digital technologies. Digital technologies, when you ask folks what they're doing around digital, they quickly move to the technology part of it. Well, we're leveraging machine learning, AI, we're doing intelligent automation, AR, VR, blockchain. But the more difficult component really of digital are the new ways of working. Things such as how can you become more agile as a company? How do you leverage design thinking? Kind of looking at a product orientation in terms of how you take things to market. Customer engagement, how do you get feedback? User experience and how that plays into how you build things out. COVID has really disrupted business, obviously. So companies are looking at how to leverage digital. We've all had to move to a virtual work environment, so that's a pretty obvious one. But also, in terms of moving with digital, this concept of start slowly, move quickly, and learn from it is a really important component. For example, intelligent automation with a focus on working capital and preservation of working capital. There's been a focus on intelligent automation. Start small within the finance function. That tends to be one of the easiest places to do that. Advanced analytics, demand planning is becoming increasingly important in terms of how you start to rebuild your manufacturing capacity. So start with one product. Machine learning for process automation in the manufacturing process again as well. Focus on one line. Launch it, learn it, you'll get better at it. It won't be perfect when you start. Mixed reality has become really, really important for a lot of different companies in terms of how they drive service and maintenance. The concept of basically having experts connected virtually has really kind of driven a lot of value in terms of just not only getting back to work, but also optimizing potentially how things are done in the future. And then e-commerce, getting your customers to buy in very different ways. A lot of businesses still rely very much on the sales customer experience, but how do you kind of enhance that through digital? Not just in the short term as required, but potentially how do you optimize that moving forward?
And so, Sean, as head of private equity for SAP, I know you work with a lot of PE-backed companies, helping them find that right technology fit. How do you approach helping companies identify the right digital solution for both survival and growth stages of their life cycle, especially given how quickly technology is evolving? That must be really tricky.
It is, and it becomes even trickier in these times. And I think that we approach this from a few different ways. One is based on the 40 years of experience that we've had and the coverage and scale that we have in 26 different industries. A lot of our conversations really begin with what are your peers doing that's driving superior performance? And what, as we look at superior performance, does it take to get there? And so we don't necessarily start with what technology is the right fit, but we start to look at those whose R&D budgets, for example, and R&D outcomes are better than most. What are those companies doing uniquely that other companies that don't hit those performance KPIs aren't doing? So we want to start with a lens that is about best practice, about model companies, about the way industries are being shaped and reimagined right now. And we're very fortunate to draw on a customer base of over 400,000 companies globally, which we can then bring that type of education and insight to our clients. The second thing I would note is that the lens that we're now beginning to see more apparent is companies coming back to the fundamentals. Every company buys stuff, makes stuff, and sell stuff, whether it's at a company level or a cross-portfolio level. So private equity operating investment teams looking at their portfolio companies, they're really starting to assess, how do we buy things? Whom are we buying them from? What's the variability in unit cost or in our commercial terms? And especially when you look at the cross-portfolio capabilities and buying power that many of these private equity firms have in aggregate, you have some really immediate savings that you can drive, especially on the indirect side. What we're seeing more and more is firms taking and aggregating, collecting, and putting advanced analytics on that data to indicate where they can start to get the greatest leverage or synergies by consolidating some of these supplier agreements and stretching them across all portfolio companies. It's simple, but right now when you're hemorrhaging and when you're just trying to survive, some of these basic digital technologies around procurement, spend cubes, sourcing networks can be absolutely spot on from a tactical, immediate way of driving cost reduction inside of businesses. There's also the category of making stuff. How are we making stuff? What do the factories look like? What do we need to do to replace the workers that we can't bring into the factory? A lot more of our conversations are steering towards not just automation, but robotics and advanced robotics. We know we're not going to bring everybody back after COVID, but we're also having to reimagine what our manufacturing and shop floors look like. And there's a ton of technology out there that's driving the next generation of digital supply chains. So we're spending a ton of time with customers right now trying to figure out and reimagine what those businesses will look like in the future. We're also spending a good deal of time on the selling. We talk about the supply chain, but what about our pricing and our integration of pricing? We're also talking about customer experience, and Marc mentioned it as well. How do I identify customer sentiment and be able to rapidly respond to it? And so it's a couple of different things. It's returning to the basics, the buying, making, and selling of stuff. And it's also taking a look based on your industry dynamics of what are the levers that your peers are pulling and being most successful pulling at, as opposed to starting with the digital or technology fit.
It's interesting to understand how PE are reimagining their operations by, as you say, going back to the basics and seeing them through a digital lens, and then perhaps coming to new ways of approaching and gaining efficiencies. And Marc, in your dealings with private equity, what are you seeing as cutting edge ways that PE operating companies are approaching transformation to keep that cutting edge and stay ahead of the game? Are you seeing different things?
We typically have seen two different types of approaches for transformation. One of them is called experience-led transformation. This is an approach that we use to leverage not only market research, but also voice of the customer data. The second type of transformation approach that we've seen is this future back transformation. So this concept of future back is really envisioning what you will likely be, and then how you basically work your way backwards to where you are today. This is also true for companies that find themselves becoming increasingly commoditized, to understand how they continue to drive that differentiation. And for both experience-led transformation as well as future back approach, again, you start small, But ultimately, to scale, you're going to need to enhance your digital core, your ERP systems. A lot of companies run SAP, but you don't need to start there necessarily. But ultimately, to scale it, you are going to need to make those sorts of investments of your digital core.
As I understand what you're saying, leading digital practice today is where companies imagine a future where they're achieving optimal end-to-end experience and performance levels, both in the back office and manufacturing, as well as the front office, using experience-led transformation. And this ultimately enables customer growth. Sean, maybe you can help us by describing some ways that SAP is actually helping their customers drive experience-led transformation. Have you got some real-life examples for us that maybe you can kind of bring this to life for us?
I think about this really in three different ways. The first is I think about this at a company level and specifically at a customer level. So what are companies doing to learn from, and how are they using what they're learning? There's interesting little things that we're starting to see here. We're actually seeing companies that are using this customer experience to test marketing sentiment. So are we positioning our product effectively? So we are actually asking our customers to contribute to and to build the marketing, product placement, product description of individual products that a company sells, which is a really amazing tie directly to the way we communicate what it is that we sell as a business. So we may position something as a toy for teens, and we may end up finding that it's actually a better description to label it tween. And we'll then be able to recategorize it, re-advertise it, reassess our demographics, and we'll be able to more effectively use our marketing spend in order to acquire new customers. And I think that that's an interesting way to use it, because I think for years, and we're getting better, and the technology is better, and the data science is better, we've asked customers in lots of different ways, from survey cards at restaurants and at retail stores to basic things that we've sent after visits to a repair shop or a doctor visit. We're now able to do that much more scalably with advanced analytics, with better data science behind it. And now we're actually able to plug it in to generate greater KPIs in the area of how does it take to target and attract customers. And so we're seeing a number of our clients who are utilizing Qualtrics, seeing them reduce their marketing costs because they're getting more effective messaging, and that messaging is coming straight from the customer. From an experience management perspective, one of the examples I've always loved is a well-known beverage manufacturer or supplier had come to the table really early on and decided to harness experience management for both the purposes of improving its inventory capabilities as well as improving its R&D capabilities. We worked with them on the data backend to support their customized machines. And I don't know if any of you have used one of these machines, but they took hold in the South quite early when they were launched during the summer. And what they allowed a person to do, generally at gas stations or large convenience stores of the like, they would allow an individual to sign up to become a participant. So they would gamify the actual interaction with the customers. They would ask them for their flavor choices and allow people to choose a variety of flavors and actually create their own customizable drink. They would then engage them online. They would then have profile information for them the next time they went to the store and used the kiosk. And what it was doing on the back end was so much on the inventory management side, on the predictive analytics of what syrups they were going to need. But actually what that all became was a really cool experiment for the R&D department. And so they were looking to reduce their R&D budget, increase their effectiveness in year one sales of products. And the way they were going to do that was to look for critical mass of flavor combinations that were provided directly by their customers. I love that type of example of customer experience actually changing business fundamentals and KPIs. I think the other thing that is interesting is from a business learning perspective. So still at a customer or company level, what is it our employees are able to tell us about our business? And I feel like we've moved to a generation of workers who are much more free to speak their mind, much more willing to speak their mind. And what's interesting is if you listen to your employees, they can often tell you just as much as your customers about what's working and what's not working. For example, there's a private equity firm that owns a chain of restaurants in South Africa, and they're drowning in operational data. And they did notice significant variations on certain days in revenue and profitability. And because they had so many SKUs, it was very difficult for them to actually identify what was it that was dragging down sales on any particular given day. They had simultaneously launched an experience management survey for their employees. And as they were racking their brain about what was creating this variability by the day, one of the things that they were hearing from their employees was that on X day of the week, their salad bar vendor, the provider of their produce, would generally not show up. And there was one day a week where the salad bar was actually all stale or old or rotted food. And therefore, none of the customers wanted to eat at the salad bar. And it turns out the salad bar, which was a hugely profitable SKU for them, was one of the things that was being dragged down on a certain day that aligned directly to the provider of that produce. So what that allowed management to do is to bang the experience management information they got from their employees against the operational data they had from their back office. And that's what allowed them to then attack that problem, go out to that supplier, show them the problem that they're noticing, and resolve that directly. The last thing I'll mention is that from a firm perspective, we're seeing a ton of firms who have always had a difficult time during due diligence to scalably identify employee and customer data, start to launch these surveys during due diligence and use the results of the surveys as an ongoing barometer of the health of the business throughout the entire life cycle. So a very scalable way for them to get customer feedback, very scalable way for them to get employee feedback, and then on their monthly operating reviews or quarterly operating reviews, they can look at that data. Then at a regularly scheduled cadence, they can reassess the same exact sentiments and come back to that information in order to see whether or not that's improving, staying the same, or declining, and then remedy or address those as they see performance.
So Sean, those examples, they're really cool. I love them. And it really just makes complete sense. I mean, why not use all the data available, whether it's user experiences or customer experiences, and leverage those to make better decisions? But I guess it's also really about having the tools there to gather that data and analyze in real time. Maybe before those tools didn't exist, but now, given all the technological advances, those tools are there and they're at our fingertips. You touched on how you're helping private equity executives with their financial due diligence and how they're using data to make better investment decisions and following those decisions through beyond the diligence cycle. Wondering if you can kind of expand on that a little bit. How have you been working with these executives with Qualtrics or other tools to help them make better decisions about their investments, either during the actual diligence process or afterwards once the investments have been made?
The first thing is our ability vis-a-vis the advanced analytic capabilities that are built in to our Ariba network are allowing us to partner even at the time of due diligence, especially in large, complicated carve-outs, are allowing us to work with our private equity partners to help them really get a handle on the supplier base, the cost basis, potential reduction savings, redundancy across multiple business areas, geographies, and segments of that carve-out. So that platform has been uniquely used by private equity firms to really get a handle on where some of that immediate low-hanging fruit that I can bake into my investment thesis during my 100-day plan. The second area, and we've talked about this, is in the experience management area. Experience management by itself, operational data by itself are helpful, but the sum of the parts is greater when they're brought together effectively. And so we are looking at providing our private equity partners a platform during due diligence to gather sentiment on pricing, on product positioning, on product satisfaction, on the buying experience, on what it's like to do business, so that they can really get a handle on, is this a healthy customer base? Is this a customer base fraught with attrition risk? In other words, customers that aren't sticky, aren't loyal? Or is this a strong customer base and potentially the opportunity at this business is at the infrastructure layer, right? I'm buying a good business with good products, but maybe laggard in digital, maybe laggard in operational processes. Okay, now I can start to really think what my bid ought to be. And then I have the ability, utilizing that, to take it throughout the life cycle, as I alluded to before. The third area, again, is from the perspective of benchmarking. While private equity firms have plenty of capability in the analytics during the deal cycle, the analysts that are doing the work to evaluate the businesses are fantastic at what they do. What we have often done and do pretty frequently is supplement that information that they're receiving from their analysts that are on the ground, crunching the numbers, and provide them the perspective on the critical KPIs based on the industry, based on the geography, based on the size of the business, as to what are the leading performance indicators that all of their peers are looking at. That at least gives them some sort of understanding. Are they buying a business in core lever areas that is Q1, best quartile, or Q4? Because what they'll be looking for are where are the opportunities to improve that business, both at a top line and an EBITDA level, in order to exit at the multiple that they're looking for.
Given the shift to experience-led transformation, I'm just wondering, and maybe Marc, you can take this, how equipped do you think is the CIO today to take on the challenge and lead a more future-backed transformation as you described before? Do you think that our focus now on customer experience and experience-led transformation is really going to change the landscape of the CIO's world?
There is an expectation with digital around quicker, faster, better, which really, in order to be able to deliver more quickly, it requires what we talked about earlier, new ways of working. How do you put agile teams together? If you're taking a more of a product-oriented approach to doing that. And that's building teams, business, technology, operations folks working together collectively as one team. That's how you kind of accelerate it. So I think CIOs today are well positioned to be that, but it requires growth. There are capability gaps that organizations have in terms of how you execute on digital. And one of the questions really becomes, okay, how are we going to build those capabilities? And we see most companies wanting to basically build those capabilities themselves, so they build a level of self-sufficiency over time. We help companies do that in terms of hire and recruit and the like. But CIOs are no different. They need to grow and develop as well. And quite frankly, it provides a real opportunity for CIOs in traditional, particularly larger companies. There was always that great divide between business and IT. If you're going to make digital work, if you're going to drive success, you have to break down those barriers. And I think CIOs really welcome the opportunity to do this. It's kind of an area, an opportunity for them to grow. And they become more prominent and important within the organization.
Before I let you go, I have to ask, given how rapidly the digital landscape is changing, what are your top tips or words of advice to PE-backed companies looking to leverage digital technologies to enhance the overall customer and user experience? Maybe, Marc, I'll start with you.
Launch and learn. Speed is of the essence. And I think the mindset in terms of, look, this concept of failing fast, I'm sure people have heard of that. Launch, learn, and even if you do fail, you've learned from it so that you improve that moving forward.
Sean, over to you.
Yeah, I have two pieces of advice. One, for many, many years, CIOs have been clamoring to get a seat at the table. They've been acquiescence of just having a folding chair at the table. To PE firms, make sure they have an actual seat at the table, and at the table early and often and collaboratively with the other line of business leaders. That's number one. Number two, don't forget talent. Don't forget your people. Private equity firms, generally speaking, don't love to talk about the soft stuff. But here's the deal. No matter what happens with COVID, it is still extremely hard to attract and retain good talent. Millennials are a fickle population who focus on experience much more than money and stability, and will walk out the door extremely quickly. So whatever you do, don't sleep on your talent.
That is excellent, excellent advice. Thank you very much. So, gentlemen, thank you for your insights today and for taking the time to speak with us. Experience-led digital transformation is truly a very exciting future for us all, and we look forward to seeing how it's not only going to shape our lives, but continue to drive value in private equity.
Thanks for tuning in to the EY NextWave Private Equity Podcast. For more thought-leading perspectives and to get in touch with Winna Brown, visit ey.com/private equity. You can also follow us on Twitter at EY Private Equity. We'll see you on the next episode.